Hey everybody, welcome back to Caveman Security. This is your host Robbie, and today we're going to go over another Owasp top 10. This time we're going to go over excessive data exposure. So if you guys are ready, let's get started. Alright, so let's talk about excessive data exposure. So what is it? So this is where the API sends way too much information. But the cool thing is the front end hides it. So we don't really see it when we're like on the web page or on the app, but the API still exposes it. So this could be dangerous if you have someone who is a little bit more technically advanced and they said, okay, well, I'm going to go use Postman or Kaido or Burp and kind of see what's available under the hood. So in this case, you know, we don't see it on the regular website, but we do see it behind the scenes. Okay, so again, we'll kind of talk about it, the front end versus the back end. So the front end is what the user sees. So this is great. You know, they only see what's necessary, not a big deal, looks very beautiful. But the back end is what the API sends. So for example, if you're going into like a section of a website that just has community stuff, you know, you could see some emails, usernames, not passwords, but usernames, emails, maybe some pictures, stuff like this. So there's a lot of extra information that could be unnecessary. So we need to be kind of mindful of that when we're looking at the different information. Okay, so here's some common sensitive data that we could run into. And these are all dangerous. This is not something that is perfect, but you know, it's something that we can look at. So internal IDs, this is important because maybe we have some IDs that we need for work purposes, maybe for coding, whatever it is, could be. Roles, you know, having access to roles could be dangerous because maybe if someone manipulates it from a user role to an admin role, maybe somehow there could be some privilege escalation there. Emails, you know, this is dangerous because if we can gather some emails and we can create some phishing attempts, we can try to do some scam, spam, all this stuff, not great. Phone numbers, you know, we can get a hold of some phone numbers, same thing, we can do some social engineering, we could, you know, do some things that we really shouldn't. If we get a hold of password hashes, this is also very dangerous. People think, well, the hashes, they keep it secure. More or less, but, you know, we do see that hackers are able to break through and actually crack those hashes. I've done it before. You know, this is something that is not impenetrable, so obviously it can happen. So we need to think about the risks when we even see these password hashes. Okay, and finally, API keys. So a lot of times we overexpose API keys. Maybe we don't use like a .env file like we should. So now we have a lot of these problems where we are exposing the keys that really is what keeps our website running or has like sensitive information. Okay, so these are just some common problems that we can see. All right, so why does this happen? So backend developers often return entire data objects or database objects. They trust the front end filtering, and they send unnecessary fields. So this is really true. I've been there as like a software developer and as a cybersecurity expert. And yes, a lot of times, you know, they'll just say, okay, well, the API reveals everything. You can just see it all. No big deal. It's kind of like the wild, wild west. So yeah, like for developers, yeah, they don't mind because they're the only ones who see it. But you know, nowadays, you know, like ChatGPT, you know, a lot of these tutorials online, I think anyone with little to no technical knowledge could probably figure out how to find some sensitive data through API exposure, right? So I think the reality is we need to work on securing these a little bit better. Okay, so here's some real world examples that we can see. So usually we can kind of say, hey, here's some usernames, emails, but you know, the APIs could return the role, the internal nodes, password hashes, MFA statuses. So this is really important because sure, we only see the front end, which is not a big deal, but the back end is what gives us a lot of information. You know, for me, when I've done a couple web application challenges where there's like a role, and I'm able to change it from a user to admin or VIP or whatever, and it's actually really interesting because a lot of times the APIs are too trusting. So really, the reality is I was able to access administrative privileges. So you got to be really mindful of that. And of course, you know, internal notes is important because maybe they're like a bad customer or maybe there's something important that needs to be known. And if the attacker knows it, then we're kind of in trouble. We've already covered password hashes. MFA status, you know, this is important because maybe we can figure out, okay, what kind of MFA tokens they use, how can we capture MFA traffic, stuff like this. So the more information that the attacker knows, the more that they can possibly win, right? All right, so why do attackers love this? So obviously attackers love hidden data because it can give us privilege escalation, which is true. You can go from user to admin pretty quickly. User enumeration, so maybe if you want to kind of do some social engineering, want to find a bunch of different emails or phone numbers for scamming, you can do that. Reconnaissance, the more the attackers do some reconnaissance, enumeration, the more that they're going to find out about the website, about the application, about the people, and they're able to make more calculated attacks. And of course, credential attacks. So if they have like a bunch of emails and they decide to do like some not password hashing, but like password brute forcing, stuff like this, it could be kind of a dangerous situation. So I think there's even an attack called credential stuffing, where they go ahead and take the password and email and they try to push out as many passwords as possible till they get a yes, which could be very dangerous because there's a high chance that could happen because a lot of times there's not a lot of strong password policy for personal users. So this could be a big problem. Okay, so here's some industries that are affected by this, and I think it's real world situations. So healthcare, this is really important. Banking, e-commerce, social media, government systems. These are all major industries that are prone to these types of attacks. So especially when we think about healthcare, they know that they have sensitive websites, sensitive information, but they don't really try to lock them down too much because it's hard to lock these things down. I think a lot of times when we look at our developers, they're trying to do their best, but they don't really think about the security or the long-term use of these websites. So reality is I think when we're building our websites, our APIs, we need to think about long-term rather than short-term. Okay, so the problem. So hidden does not always equal secure. So just because a user doesn't see it does not mean that it's okay. Okay, so this is really true. So the front end hides data, but that is not security. That's kind of like security through obscurity, which is kind of ridiculous. So really, we need to take the time to secure these endpoints. We need to make sure that we're doing the right thing with this. Okay, so here's a kind of a secure API design. So API should only send necessary data. This is true. So reality is when we get these API requests, we should just get minimal responses, like maybe like email and username. I think that's okay. Because the reality is we can't completely get rid of everything, but if we can get the bare minimum, I think it's good. We should have field filtering, so trying to limit as much information as possible. And of course, we should have least privilege. So obviously, we should have like JWT tokens in place, cookies in place, and it should only be what we can see. So as long as we cannot manipulate those tokens and those tokens are set to just the user, then I think we're going to have like a better time because now we're not too worried about how much information that person can see. Okay, so here's some good examples of a secure request. So here's a bad API request, or response, I'm sorry. So here we see username, email, role, password hash. So this right here is a recipe for disaster. Now we can look at a better API response. Now, is it perfect? No, but it's a little bit better. So we see, username and email. This is a lot better because now at least we can look at the email and say, okay, well, we can do some enumeration, but this is all I have. So the reality is it's a little bit better. Now, could we probably take it a step further? Maybe, but at the moment, this is probably the better situation compared to the bad API response. Okay, so here's some key takeaways. So excessive data exposure happens when APIs trust the front end too much. Obviously they think, oh, it'll hide it, it's okay. They expose unnecessary fields, and of course they leak internal information. So we don't really want that either, because the more internal information we leak, the more problems we have for our website, the more vulnerabilities that attackers can find. Okay, so guys, this one kind of wraps it up here. So let's go ahead and do our demo. We're going to use the crAPI API, and we're going to kind of take a look at another example of excessive data exposure. All right, guys, so here we are. So let's go ahead and take a look at this just a little bit. So from our last couple episodes, we were able to talk about the excessive data exposure. That was a pretty good example, but it didn't really talk about any internal data. So let's do the second challenge for the excessive data exposure. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into our profile, and we're going to upload a video. So let's see what we got. So we're going to go to downloads. I think I picked some random video. Hopefully it uploads, I hope. All right, video is uploading. So let's go ahead and take a look at that API request. So let's see what we got. Let's see here. All right, so here we are. So you see on this endpoint, we have identity, API, v2, user, video, and then it's like a 0. So, and we see that we did that. So now when we talk about data exposure, we want to look at a few things. So here we can already see some information. So we can see the ID, which is 52. So that could be some sort of internal dialogue for the API, which is bad. We see the video name, which is also could be bad. The conversion parameter, which is codecs H264. And then we see the profile video, and then whatever this encoding is. Now, this may not look like much to you. This may look just like gobbledygook, but the reality is this is excessive data exposure. And when we look at this, this can be used against people. So when we think about this, we can say, well, if I have the ID, the codecs, hashing algorithm, all this stuff, then this can be decoded, and it could probably perform some sort of attack. And this could be dangerous because maybe they can say, okay, well, we can see that there's a vulnerable upload attack. Maybe there's some sort of exploit I can perform. And this is dangerous. So when we look at this, this may not look like much, but in the eyes of a developer, eyes of an attacker, this is money. Because they can sit there and say, okay, I can use this to attack people. I can kind of keep the same parameters and throw in some junk data that could cause some malignant problems, etc. So this is just another example of excessive data exposure. So guys, hopefully you like this, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.